Hi, I'm Jim. I'm going to talk to you about what I think is a particularly important application of humor, specifically using humor to teach/foster wisdom. So all of us here know something about humor, what it is and how it works and so on, but wisdom may or may not be something that we spent time looking at. I have. I needed a lot of wisdom. And I'm talking about practical wisdom as opposed to religious. This is about making stuff happen, not here's how to avoid choking the hammer so you can use its leverage. That would be tips and tricks, but not profound religious humor about the truth of life. The thing that David Brooks summarizes as what's going to happen next. If you do that thing you're contemplating, what will be the implications? How will your friends and opponents respond? What opportunity will have been lost? There are several good working definitions of wisdom. I'll use one from Valerie Tiberius, who has the particular benefit of working at my school, the University of Minnesota. She defines wisdom this way. It's a set of dispositions and skills that help us deliberate about what matters and translate that into choices and actions. My complaint is that there's not nearly enough wisdom in our society today. Wisdom suggests that we see many sides of a story, not just what we want or what our family or our shareholders want, but what do our competitors want? What do our enemies want? We need to understand these things, even if we have no intention of honoring them, if for no other reason than to head them off. Wisdom suggests that we take a long-term perspective, partly learning from what has happened before and partly avoiding decisions that are going to come back to haunt us later. But our culture tends to get us to look at the next quarter. Wisdom suggests that we pay attention to emotions as indicators of what is important to us and to others, but that we do not surrender to them. Our culture tends to celebrate dramatic behavior and performative outrage. Wisdom suggests that we remember how little we actually can know for sure. Well-known truths from a few centuries ago seem ridiculous now, so why would our current ideas look any less so many years from now? Our culture tends to reward and even worship certainty. There's a reason that clever trickery is called a con job, confidence job. Wisdom suggests that we base our plans on objective knowledge and realistic probabilities rather than hopes and dreams. Our culture tends to reward the romantic. Wisdom suggests that we defer to experts because they have studied deeply and developed intuitions about their topic. However, it also suggests that we avoid deferring to anyone because of their confidence or because of their friendship, or worst of all, because they're recommending the very thing we most want to do. Wisdom suggests that we stop and think before we jump to a decision. But our culture says get there first, beat the others. Wisdom usually means taking a tentative path, one that could be reversed smoothly if and when things go wrong. But our culture celebrates the go-getters who commit and give their all to a project. Wisdom requires painfully honest self-examination, something that we as humans are quite bad at. We are masters and mistresses of self-deception. In fact, I even think this presentation is quite interesting. My overall complaint is that we don't have nearly enough wisdom in society and that our public education system is not helping. Don't get me wrong, teachers want to help. But they're smothered in accountability and efficiency measures that seem almost designed to produce superficial STEM learning at the expense of the flower, the thinking and the reflecting that are needed to develop perspective. Unlike coaches who are expected to set aside time for practice and analysis of successes and failures, and expected to develop instincts and agility and judgment in their athletes, teachers are expected to move expeditiously through a prescribed and approved curriculum. They need help finding technologies that can get insights across quickly and with a minimum of grief and resistance from students and from parents. With all these various demands in mind, humor might be just the ticket. But why don't we just teach people, hey, here's the wise thing to do. Take a long-term perspective. Cultivate your best side. Consider other people. Why don't we just tell people these things, perhaps in kindergarten, so they'll grow up thusly informed and everything will be fine? Well, of course we do tell people these things in kindergarten. We tell them to share and to be nice and take turns and don't pull each other's hair. But they still grow up, as you see all around you. Sometimes we assume that the wise choice is going to be popular, and we all want to look wise. Surely if I'm the mayor and I make wise decisions, I'll be reelected time and time again, and people will have faith in my judgment. But reality suggests a different picture. Many times, wisdom demands sacrifice and delayed gratification. This is going to ruffle some feathers and annoy powerful people. A dose of humor might help the medicine go down. Why humor? What's so great about humor? For one thing, it gives us practice at suspending judgment. Consider some random joke. Someone says a penguin walks into a bar. Our first thought is not going to be, that probably didn't happen. We're waiting patiently to see what's coming next. And we're paying strict attention so we don't miss anything and fail to get the joke. Humor keeps us in a play frame. Whatever's going on is conceptual and abstract, not threatening. So there's less call to be defensive and stay firmly on guard. The joker, the one who's telling the jokes, has survived all the problems they're talking about. Remember Rodney Dangerfield? He always started out, I'm all right now, but you should have seen what happened yesterday. Humor encourages and even demands cognitive reframing. Often, something that seems to mean one thing in the setup turns out to mean something quite different in the punchline. We're not only expected to be flexible, but we're rewarded for it in the end with the pleasure of laughter or giggles or what have you, and the satisfaction of being in on the joke. And that good feeling promotes memory about the event also. Probably most important of all, if you suggest that something is funny because it's absurd or exaggerated or unreasonable, and if people laugh at that, they're certifying their agreement. I'm not talking about the kind of polite laughter we have in school that signifies respect for the speaker, or even the kind of clapter that political humor gets that suggests agreement with the speaker. I'm thinking of the genuine reactions that bubble up in us more or less involuntarily. These serve as indisputable evidence for the people who are laughing that the situation proposed as funny was indeed absurd or exaggerated or unreasonable. Of course, humor that does not fire fails to achieve any of that, and in fact can cause ruptures in relationships. But when it works, the insight transferred through humor is undeniable and pleasant. And this is particularly important because that wise response is not always the one we wanted to hear. Sometimes we can use simple aphorisms like you might find on a bumper sticker to actually do some instruction. Here's an example. Yogi Berra supposedly once said, "Nobody goes there anymore, it's too crowded." Well, how did it get crowded? What does that even mean? And this is the kind of statement which is easy to reject and laugh off as a joke, but it actually describes a common phenomenon when you think about it. Some places get so popular that it's not that attractive or pleasant to visit them anymore. Who can forget Pogo in Walt Kelly's 1970 Earth Day cartoon? He looks around at litter everywhere and declares, "We have met the enemy and he is us." The humor comes from a play on Commodore Perry's message about the vulnerability of his British naval opponents, sometime during the War of 1812, where the wisdom comes from, I hope, is quite obvious. But contrast this against the old Hungarian riddle that Victor Raskin loved to quote. What's the difference between a sparrow? Both of its wings are identical, especially the left one. This statement seems illogical on its surface, and if you dig carefully inside of it to discover its hidden insight, you'll be very disappointed. So we have to be careful about what might seem like wise sayings. So what are some techniques that will work reliably to transmit wisdom? Reductio is one that is already popular. Somebody says, here's what I think. Well, okay, but if you carry that to its extremes, look how ridiculous it turns out to be. You might want to take that position with a grain of salt. So let's look at a common example from a class in ethics. There are many ethical theories and approaches to finding the right course of action in various situations. These include a variety of religious perspectives and general philosophies of living. However, just as we can take dozens of humor theories and sort them into broad categories, so can we sort theoretical approaches to ethical decision-making into three main categories. The first we encounter as children. This could be called deontology. You should do thus and so because it's the right thing to do. The name comes from the word for duty, which is also the word for the great watchmaker god. Deists, or some people say deists, believe in a creator God who made the world in all its glory and complexity, but is not here fussing with it from day to day, not answering prayer or cheering for your favorite sports team. This was the God Einstein believed in. Deontology suggests that there are some indisputable rules that we have to follow no matter what, just like the rules of physics that the deist God laid out. There's great authority in these rules, and we would be unspeakably arrogant to overrule them just because we thought there should be an exception. Think of the teacher who would not accept your late paper in spite of your many compelling reasons, because rules are rules. Or think of Adam and Eve having the audacity to partake of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, as if they were qualified to consider such things for themselves. A second kind of ethical system could be called teleological. You should generate a fair outcome because, well, that's fair. The name comes from the word for transmission, such as in telephone or teleportation, and the idea is that any act or decision should be judged on its result, its outcome, how it ends up. The most famous teleological theory of ethics is utilitarianism. Decisions should maximize the utility, the benefit of the greatest number of people. This is a favorite amongst business students because it sounds good, the greatest happiness principle, and because it comes down to a calculation. Think of the teacher who would accept your late paper because of your many compelling excuses, thinking that they seemed legitimate. Or think of a judge who stretches the interpretation of some law so that a hapless tenant can win the day instead of a nasty corporate landlord. The third approach to ethics is quite different, and we could call it virtue theory. It comes from Aristotle, and the basic idea is that if you cultivate a pure and ethical character, the decisions you make will automatically be ethical. This idea was shared by Confucius, who explained that young people do whatever they want, and as they mature, they consider peers and social rules much more, and then when they mature, they do whatever they want again. But now, the only things they want are good things. Psychology students will recognize Larry Kohlberg's stages of moral development here. Think of a teacher who wants to consult with their therapist or guru before deciding whether or not to accept your late paper. The important thing to teach students is that none of these approaches is sufficient to make ethical decisions, and that they cannot therefore choose whichever one gives them permission to do whatever they had wanted to do in the first place. And here's how humor is used to get that point across. Let's start with deontology. People should not lie. Others rely on those lies and are led astray. Some become bitter and cynical when they no longer trust the things that they hear. And in any case, lying is wrong, as mentioned in every conceivable moral and religious document. So, imagine you are watching the evening news and a little girl taps at your door. "I'm being chased by a homicidal maniac," she announces, and asks to come in and hide behind your couch. You agree, of course, wanting to help your neighbor and all that. But soon there's a pounding at the door, and it's the homicidal maniac, demanding to know where the little girl is. Well, you don't like to lie, so you tell the maniac where she's hiding. It's a classic reductio. It's ridiculous, of course, but it drives home the point that doing the right thing no matter what is not going to be enough of a guide for ethical action. What about teleology? After all, it's quite reasonable to choose actions that lead to the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. Imagine my Uncle Joe comes into the hospital to pick up his wife, who is a busy neurosurgeon, after work. On the way to her office, he passes Karen, whose kidneys have failed, and David, who has a very weak heart, and Susan, who really needs a liver transplant. Now, shouldn't we anesthetize Uncle Joe and harvest all of his working organs so that the other three and their friends and family can be happy? Sure, my aunt might miss Joe, but so many other people will benefit. This is just as ridiculous, of course, but drives home the point that simple calculations aren't going to be enough of a guide for ethical action either. There have to be some kind of guardrails, some things that are simply not allowed. Isn't this why we have a constitution that puts some absolute limits on what the majority can do just because they want to? And this leaves us with virtue theory, in which we defer our decisions to Nelson Mandela or Gandalf or whoever we trust implicitly. But who will decide on the right mentor? And no matter how wise they are, will they know anything about our specific situation or about our own hopes and dreams or past transgressions and traumas? We can pretty quickly ridicule any formula for devising right and wrong. So where's the wisdom to be found? Of course, the insight that is transferred through humor is that one cannot profitably reify any system of guidance. Rules and theories and things are only true within a network of assumptions that sometimes are violated. 1 and 1 is 2. One raindrop and another raindrop gives me one big raindrop. Oh, but wait, that doesn't count because they weren't separate. And one hamster and another hamster gives me 11 hamsters. Oh, but that doesn't count because they weren't inanimate objects. Everything works only within the system that it's meant to work within. So we're like Tevye, adjusting standards of acceptable limits for each daughter one at a time, as we have to face each situation in all of its uniqueness and its complexity. And learning this through humor, especially active ridicule on our part, makes it a lot easier to digest. We're ridiculing a misapplied rule, not another person or, God forbid, ourselves. There's no reason to be defensive or embarrassed, although we're strongly invited to be confused. So I hope this little talk has got you thinking. I hope you'll consider how you can use humor to get wisdom across to students and colleagues who could use some wisdom. If you can invite them to build a habit of ridiculing their own follies and mistakes, they can join you in rejecting foolishness and experiencing the contentment that comes from being able to see around corners a little bit and avoid calamities.